This is Dr. Rich Schuttler with lesson number 12 of 12 lessons inside the series for Chapter 3, the methodology. The title of this lesson is Bringing Chapter 3 Together. In this lesson, I'll address an introduction, give you information on why there is this lesson in the program. I will give the Chapter 3 big view, what I call that holistic view of the chapter. This is perhaps the view that a dissertation chair, committee members, or university reviewers might be looking for. And I'll conclude with a reflective summary. In this introduction, the purpose for this lesson is to help you better understand how all the previous lessons to this point, the 11 before this, kind of go together as a systematic whole. While I addressed each individual part or a heading, now it's time to put it all together so you can see a big view on how they're connected or perhaps interconnected, and even some connections perhaps back to chapters 2 as well as chapter 1. I'll review the chapter headings. I'll give an overview of each heading once again, and I will then give more information on how each heading is connected with the other, and perhaps while I'm doing that, give you several tips to consider so that you can craft your chapter 3 perhaps a little bit more quicker than you might otherwise. I'm hoping that by doing this, it'll bring even more clarity to the work that you're trying to accomplish. And this final session concludes the series on Chapter 3. In regards to your data analysis plan, which was in the last session, that goes along well with the entire chapter because after all, this is what you're trying to communicate to people is your data analysis plan. You're indicating information that supports how you're going to collect your data than what you're going to do with it. Chapter 3 is titled the methodology chapter at most universities. If it has some other name, it's probably very similar. But the idea for Chapter 3 is to communicate literally how much you know about research, how you're going to go about your research, and then the rationale for your research that you're going to do. And it will also give you information that helps the reader to understand what you're going to do with that data once you get it. In essence, this is plan your work, then work your plan. Now, this is a common saying, particularly in industries where there's quality concepts in place or just where there's a lot of strategic planning happening. And that could be almost any organization from a mom and pop store to a large corporate organization. There's also the saying that's pretty much like this, except it's opposite, that says failing to plan is planning to fail. I do believe that you have to have a plan. And the better your plan is, the better your Chapter 3 will come together. This is why earlier on I mentioned about a flow chart, a research map. That was in one of the earlier lessons in this series. I'm going to address that flow chart again because I think it's important that you consider that or reconsider creating one, because I do believe, much like the plan, once you have the flow chart and you know exactly what's going to happen, then it's easier. This chapter, as I've mentioned before in the other lessons, I'm going to mention a couple things yet again in this lesson to conclude on to help perhaps drive home the salient points. And one of them is in Chapter 3 in particular, it shows your discerning critical thinking skills as a researcher. Keep in mind, as you transition from your content courses to just purely working on your proposal and dissertation, you must become aware of the need to shift from a student to an academic researcher or a scholarly researcher. As you do that, then you will be able to perhaps write better, more in the context of a researcher, and explain your ideas more in a sound and systematic approach that other people will understand and even view your work as a research study. This is not an assignment that you're doing in a class. It's not necessarily an assignment that you're doing to earn your degree. It's a doctoral dissertation research study that's required for graduation. This chapter, more than any other chapter to date so far, meaning from chapters 1 and 2, shows you have thought through the research method and design, that you have somehow become expert enough to reflect upon exactly why you're using your research method and design, because you've also already indicated in Chapter 1 why you're perhaps not using one of the other research method and designs. Now in chapter 3, you're really going to elaborate on this information more than you did in chapter 1. And yes, it's about these excruciating details. Chapter 3, if you just get it figured out from the very beginning that you have to be detailed and very explicit in everything you write, the easier it will be. Leave nothing left to the undecided point of view. If you're going to suggest that you're going to do data or theoretical saturation, that's great. Now tell us why you're going to do it. Tell us how you're going to do it. How will you know when you achieved it? I mean, every little detail from the process that you're going to apply. Now, I understand perhaps you may not truly have a full understanding of what you're going to do because you've never done it yet. Well, that's why you can go and look at other people's research studies who have done work before you, and you can see how people perhaps in your university through ProQuest dissertations have done it successfully and passed. You could look at different types of research studies. And then the resources that I've already provided in several of the prior lessons, and I'll address yet before we end this lesson, can help you as well to get that better understanding. And the more you become that research expert and you gain more and more knowledge and skills in your research method and design, the easier this becomes. This is why you have to become somewhat of an expert in your research method and design. The flow chart. If you're struggling to write chapter 3, I encourage you to stop and put a flow chart together. If you're new to chapter 3, perhaps you're still working on chapter 1 and 2 and you haven't started drafting chapter 3 yet, well, I encourage you to first write a flow chart, this research map perhaps. If you're not sure how to create one, then review the lesson titled Research Map, and or start to look online in places such as Google and look for different flow charts, look for research maps. You'll find a lot of information. Many dissertations do have them within them, although many do not because it's not required. And as I mentioned, in pretty much every presentation where I talked about a table or a figure, whenever you get the chance, consider including a table or figure in your chapters because they can add value. They add value because in many instances, a picture is worth 1,000 words. And I have seen it where committee members and or reviewers at a university will see a research map or this flow chart and find it to be complete and therefore not spend much time actually reading chapter 3 because they feel confident that the research map or the flow chart is so detailed that they know everything's going to be within the chapter that needs to be there, or they'll just skim it for some of the most important parts. Now, this is a great advantage in your approval process. Whether you believe it or not, oftentimes it's the perception you set early on with the things such as a figure or a table or the way you write. In many instances, when I review a proposal or a chapter for the first time, usually by the first 5 pages that I read, I get a sense for how the person writes. Are they a good writer? Do they write academically? Are they writing as a scholar? Are they writing as a researcher? Do they have a clue on how to put a paragraph together or content that flows well? These are things that when you get it figured out and you write really well and you have information in there that flows in a manner that's informative and interesting, you'll be surprised at how many people don't go looking for other details that they might otherwise. Now, these are all the headings commonly found in chapter 3 of a proposal and dissertation. I put them basically in the order as I have my mentees put theirs, and I also have it in order which really, from my point of view, suggests that if you just write your chapter from heading to heading, you'll be fine. If you start to write the chapter going from one section to another, jumping backwards and forwards, you might find it harder to produce your work in a manner that's going to be consistent and going to represent you well. I did this same kind of concept in chapter 1. If you haven't seen or listened to the chapter 1 lessons, you may want to go back and do that, or if you don't have it, then procure them, because I went through the same kind of philosophy as I do with my mentees, where we create one section at a time. Now, while this starts in the upper left-hand side with introduction, this is actually going to be the last section you'll write in your chapter. as you will the conclusion. Once you write the conclusion, then you go back and write the introduction. Introduction just basically informs the reader in one paragraph, maybe two at the most, what's coming in that chapter. You don't have to go any detail. It's much like just your introduction in any other chapter or in any assignment you've done. It helps the reader to understand what's going to follow. And the conclusion indicates basically what was in that chapter. When you start writing chapter 3, I highly encourage you to first write your research method and design sections. In chapter 1, I prescribed that you should have 4 paragraphs for the research method and design, which in chapter 1 is titled The Nature of the Study. There I indicated 4 paragraphs. One paragraph that indicates why your chosen research method is appropriate for the data you need to collect to produce information to answer the research question that can potentially be as such to lessen the specific problem. I also said in the second paragraph, indicate why the other research method is not chosen and why it is perhaps not the best suited to produce the data that you need. In essence, if you're writing a qualitative study, you'll first indicate what that method is and why it's appropriate. And then you would indicate in the second paragraph why quantitative research methods would not produce the data you need. Again, I'm still talking in chapter 1. Then you'd have a third paragraph which would then indicate why your chosen research design is appropriate for the data you need. And then the fourth paragraph would be directed at why another research design in your same research method was not applied. For example, if you're going to do a phenomenological study, you would indicate in the third paragraph why you're doing a phenomenological study and how that will produce the data you need. And in the fourth paragraph, you may address perhaps something like a case study and indicate how that was considered, but it was not appropriate for your work. Now, just doing those 4 paragraphs reflects your discerning critical thinking skills. Moving back into chapter 3 now, I would suggest that you double the content. Basically, now you're going to provide about 4 paragraphs for the research method and 4 for the research design, and you're going to have roughly 8 paragraphs. Maybe a little bit more, maybe 9 or 10 if you've got a complex study. If you're doing a mixed method study, you might have a little bit more. But think of it this way. Chapter 1 represented the salient points, the high view of what you're talking about. Now in chapter 3, it's those details. Really get into helping the reader understand more so how qualitative research methods are appropriate for what you need to do. Cite examples from experts. Other studies have done similar type of work that you're doing as well. Help the reader understand more so why the other research method is not as appropriate. Here, focus more. I would say encourage you to write about 3 paragraphs on why your research method is appropriate, and 1 paragraph, maybe 2 at the most, on why another one is not. Now, when you get down to the research design, let's just say you're doing a qualitative phenomenological study. You want to give information about why phenomenological studies are going to produce the data you need, but then go deeper. If you're going to use perhaps a modified Van Kamp approach to data analysis, have a whole paragraph on that, and then cite and repeat information that others have used from experts. Perhaps not experts such as Cresswell or that you're getting from a textbook. Go to the originators of the content. Look at other research studies. Go to Sage Research Online Methods. There you'll find information to help you as well. Think about chapter 3. Roughly, you're going to produce about 8 paragraphs. You're going to have 2 or 3 for the research method, 2 or 3 for the research design. Don't forget to write to the actual process of how you're going to go about analyzing your data if you're using a specific method or some sort of analysis approach. There are many prescribed for different types of research designs. Here's where you want to go in very deep. In chapter 1, you may have just briefly alluded in the nature of the study section that you're going to do a qualitative phenomenological study with a modified Van Kamp approach. Here in chapter 3, you would have at least one full paragraph on the modified Van Kamp analysis approach. So you're going deeper. Think about chapter 1, you had 4 paragraphs. Here you're going to double that at least, but not too much more. Don't go in and having probably 5 pages. That's too much. Now, in the research questions, this would follow the research design. You've already alluded to the research question or questions in chapter 1. Now again, you're going to go a little bit deeper. In chapter 1, you probably had 1 paragraph about research questions. Here you're going to have 2 paragraphs, maybe 3, just related to your research questions. This will depend on how many research questions you have and the research method and design, but consider at least 2 paragraphs where you give some information on how the research questions are designed for your research method and design. How are research questions worded? What are the common concerns when producing research questions to ensure that the data is produced? It's not enough just to provide the research questions. Give more information. Help the reader to understand that you know how research questions came to be and what's the best way to word them and phrase them. What are the major concerns when crafting research questions to produce the data that's needed to be able to give information to those who have concerns as you relate to in a specific problem. I encourage you, as you write this section about research questions, make a tie-in on how when the research question is answered, that will produce information that people could use to lessen the specific problem that you wrote about in chapter 1. This could be also tied to the significance of the study section because in many cases you have indicated or people will indicate in that section of the significance of the study that same survey population who's having the problem is a specific problem. So you can see some tie-ins that go back into chapter 1 and you can make those connections in your work and you'll find that your work will get approved even quicker than you thought possible. Now the hypotheses, these only go to quantitative dissertation research methods. In the hypotheses section, in chapter 1, you probably wrote maybe just the hypotheses and you probably offered the null hypotheses. That's all you need. Here, offer more information. Now you're talking perhaps a paragraph or 2 just on content related to how you're going to test your hypotheses. Basically, that you write your hypotheses out and you say how you're going to test for them. This is a good place for you to be able to indicate briefly how you're going to test for them or how they were designed. Later in the data analysis section, you'll add more, and that's fine. It's okay if it's repeated. But in chapter 3, think about having at least 2 paragraphs that's just related to helping the reader understand that you know what hypotheses are, how they're tested, when they're tested, what does the outcome do. Ideally, when you test the null hypothesis, that answer is as such to answer the research question that it's aligned to. When you answer that research question, then again, it produces that information back to the specific problem. The next section is survey population. Let there be no doubt for the reader on who is and who is not potentially capable of being in this survey population. I did a survey one time. It was for a grant, and the survey population was every employee over the age of 18 in the United States. I had to give a lot of rationale for that, but basically it was 1 full paragraph on just how people were qualified to be a part of that survey. In regards to your work, who is the survey population? Just give from the broad, if you will, perspective, then narrow it down, that it's perhaps all the employees in the United States. And then I would, if I was writing this here, I would narrow it down to all those who are employed in the United States and who are of at least the age of 18 or more. You may have different qualifications, needless to say, and you may have more qualifications that narrow it down. Perhaps it's high school teachers in the state of California, in one district, perhaps even in one city. Whoever is the survey population, make sure that you have no doubt when done that if somebody picks it up and reads it, they will know whether they are qualified or not to be in that survey population. Or if I was to read it, that if I had 10 people in front of me, that I could ask them a couple questions and determine whether each one of them was qualified or not. Think of it that way. You're almost like creating a checklist. And that's not a bad idea. You can actually create your own checklist. You may even put that in as a figure saying that these are all the criteria that somebody has to meet to be part of your survey population. Then another paragraph or two about the unit of analysis. Survey population may be everybody in the United States, but for me the unit of analysis was people who were employed over the age of 18. Who is your unit of analysis? In most cases, this is already decided, already developed in Chapter 1, because in your purpose statement, you gave your research method and design. You gave, if you're doing a quantitative, you gave your independent variables and your dependent variables, and you gave the location unit of analysis. Now it's about bringing it in Chapter 3 and adding at least one full paragraph, if not two, about the unit of analysis. If, by chance, you don't know who your survey population is, a unit of analysis, when you're listening to this for the first time, don't worry about it. Chances are, in that case, you're still in Chapter 1 or Chapter 2. And as you get through more research courses and as you get ready to move into this section, you'll be able to determine this. The good thing is, if you look at it this way, that you know for the survey population, you're going to write about 2 paragraphs. If you don't know what the survey population is or what the unit of analysis is, when you get to this stage, then you just focus some time on reading about survey populations, how to determine it, whether you need a sample size calculator or how you're going to determine who you're going to interview. And then you just write to the sections. In most cases, there are other dissertations and other people who have provided you the example to emulate. Do not hesitate to go look at other people's work who have produced dissertations in the same research method and design and see how they wrote these sections. I'm certainly not an advocate for copying it or cutting and pasting, but there's not a lot of differences in how you go about figuring this out. If you're going to use a calculator, you can actually use the same calculator that they used and use the same citation. Just make sure you look at that citation and that source that somebody else used to make sure that it is valid for what you want to do. Now the next section is about sampling. A paragraph, maybe 2, about how you decided whether you're going to do some sort of probability or convenience sampling. What does that mean? Give the definition, cite it from some expert, then show how it's going to be applied in your work and give the rationale for why you're applying it the way you are. Again, be very clear so that the reader, when somebody else picks it up, they know exactly how people got into your survey population, and the sampling technique helps to indicate how you've narrowed it down. An example is that perhaps sampling is that you went out to everybody on the web or everybody in Facebook and you said anybody who meets these criteria, or you did a snowball sampling technique where you asked one person if they know anybody else that they can send it to and have it roll on that way. All you have to do is just be crystal clear with excruciating details. Let's move up to the second column on the right-hand side, consent. Consent. How are you going to get consent? Think about it this way. Again, let's keep this very simple. You've got a consent form. How are you going to get it to people? What is going to be in that consent form? What are the different pieces or criteria that somebody has to consent to so they know exactly what's going to happen? Now, there's a lesson on consent and confidentiality in this lesson program. If you don't remember, go back and listen to that and look at other people's consent forms. In the appendix of a dissertation that's published, you will find these consent forms. You don't have to recreate the wheel. All you have to be able to do is put in there what applies to you. I encourage you, just take time and write a consent form out. Make sure all the different things that are appropriate for your study are in there. Then have your dissertation chair look at it and then get it approved. And then all you have to do is write to consent. More than likely, this is about 2 paragraphs in your Chapter 3. The same thing with confidentiality. While I explained it already in a prior lesson, how are you going to protect the data? How are you going to protect the people's reputation or their names from being known if they are involved in your survey population? How are you going to protect all the data and information once it's done and your dissertation's approved, and how long? All you again have to do here is write probably 2 paragraphs at the most. You can write 2 paragraphs, right? When you're totally focused on just this one area, maybe it'll take you a week to write these 2 paragraphs. depending on how much time you put into it. Some of you could write it in one afternoon. But if you look at the whole chapter, it's hard to write. Just focus on confidentiality when it's that time. Then write to survey instrument. What is the survey instrument you're going to use? Why are you going to use it? How are you going to get it? How is it appropriate for the data you want to need? Think about every question somebody might ask you about the survey instrument. If you're going to create one, that's fine. If you're going to do open-ended, semi-structured interview questions, then have that as an appendix to questions that you're going to have. I gave some information about that to try and maybe have about 6 or 7, some sort of number that's not going to take the person more than an hour or so to answer for you. If you have a Likert type survey, indicate, did you create it? Are you going to use somebody else's? If you're using somebody else's, you have to have permission. Put in there that you have permission, and if you have an approved form for permission to use their survey, then you include that as appendix. Everything somebody needs to know about your survey instrument is important. The piece that's often missing in proposals that do not get approved is that when the writer talks about the survey instrument, they don't go deep enough to help the reader understand by the completion of the survey how that's going to produce either information or data that's going to be able to support the hypotheses or not, whether they're going to be able to reject the null or fail to reject the null, and how that then answers the research question. When I created my own survey for my dissertation, I had to show how each individual Likert type questions, and I had 12 of them, how they aligned to my independent variables, because I was testing the independent variables against the dependent variable. With the 12 questions, I had to basically map it out so everybody knew when they looked at question number 3, 6, and 9 that they related to the independent variable, which I'll call it independent variable number 1, and how other questions align to independent variables number 2 or number 3. Here again, you're talking maybe 2, 3, 4 paragraphs at the most with the appendix of that instrument. If you're going to be doing a qualitative study, if you're not sure about doing a pilot test or what may call a field test, you may have to write that in this section as well will be followed later by actually when you do the pilot study. If you're going to pilot study the instrument, here is a good time to indicate that you're going to do that, how you're going to do it, and why. The next 2 sections about validity and reliability. You're going to have to determine these. Now, it's beyond the scope of this lesson for me to be able to teach you what validity and reliability are, but you may have to literally test for these items determined by your research tool or your research instrument. If you're creating your own Likert type survey, or if you're using one by somebody else, you're going to have to indicate the validity and reliability of that instrument. If you're doing your own, you're going to have to do your own testing. If you're using somebody else's instrument that's already been tested for reliability and validity, and you have that information, then you include that in your work. This is usually found in the instrument itself. For example, if you were going to use the multi-level quotient, leadership quotient survey, you would find the MLQ information on the website. If you're going to use my supervisor leadership and communication inventory survey, you would find that information on our website as well. So you would just basically copy that and indicate how it was tested and to what levels. Again, you're talking maybe 2 paragraphs for each of these. Not a lot of information. Now we'll talk about the pilot study. Now here at this point, it's how you're actually going to do the pilot study. What's the exact steps you're going to go about it? You will talk, or write rather, how you will do the pilot from the beginning to end. If you have open-ended questions and you're going to give it to several people to review, to give you feedback on it, you're going to exactly describe how that process will go. What will you do if they all agree? What will you do if a couple of them give you information that makes you consider and or whether you will change the questions or not? Make no doubt for the reader exactly how the pilot's going to go, why you're doing it, and what the potential outcomes of the pilot are. You may have to write in there, determined upon what you're doing with your research, that you may actually have to do more than one pilot. This is not uncommon. It's not likely going to happen, but it's not uncommon that you might have to pilot test your questions more than once. That's something you want to consider writing in there, particularly if you're creating your own Likert type questions, that you may have to do more than one pilot. I certainly had to do that with mine. I didn't write it in my proposal, but I wish I would have, because I wouldn't have had to worry about it so much of including it back into it. I never thought I would have to do a second one. You never know, and this is why you want to talk with your dissertation chair. When you say that you may have to consider a second pilot, it helps the person who's reading your work to understand you know what you're doing and you know why you would have to do a second pilot. I often ask this question at oral defense. Why did you not do a second pilot study? Or did you consider doing a second pilot study? Why or why not? Oftentimes then I get to find out how well they thought through their work. The next section in your Chapter 3 is the data collection. How are you going to collect the data? Don't just say that you're going to put, surveys out to 600 people. How are you going to put it out there? Are you going to do it through a company electronic mail system? How are you going to get all the surveys to people, and how are you going to get the data back? If you're going to interview people, how are you going to interview people? Once you got people qualified for your survey population, are you going to call them? Are you going to send them an email telling them about what this is about to set up an appointment with you? Are you going to do it face-to-face in somebody's conference room, in somebody's office, at Starbucks, or are you going to do it online with Skype? I mean, literally everything somebody needs to know to be able to do that research in case you couldn't do it. One of the things I've talked about pretty regularly in this chapter series is that Chapter 3, those excruciating details, should be written at a level where once your work is approved, somebody else with your same basic background could pick that chapter up, read through the chapter, and know exactly what to do, and do it the same way you would do it, and knowing why they're doing each step. So in your data collection area that you're writing about, this may be a page long. It is literally helping the reader understand everything you propose you're going to do. Now, in the dissertation, you may find that you had to do something different. Like, for example, when I did mine, I had no intention, I didn't even think about it, didn't even know about doing triangulation until after I collected the data when one of my committee members recommended it. So it was not in my proposal, but it had to be included in Chapter 3 when I did my dissertation. Once you get the data collection piece done in Chapter 3, then you're going to need maybe 2 or 3 paragraphs helping the reader to understand, once you collect your data, what are you going to do with it? Now, if you have qualitative and quantitative data, you're going to have to describe both, how you're going to process it. Are you going to use SPSS for quantitative work? Are you going to be running averages, means in regards to things like such as your demographics? If you're going to do a qualitative study and you're going to take interviews, literally, how are you going to do that? For example, you have 6 open-ended questions. Ideally, you're going to take the answers from the first question after they've been transcribed. You're going to take all that data from everybody who has answered that question and put only that data into in vivo software and run it and find out what the themes are. And you would do that subsequently for each individual question. You wouldn't take all the answers from all the questions and put it in vivo, because you wouldn't have no way of being able to understand what was associated with each individual interview question. Now, you may do that for each individual interview question and then decide to put it all in there as a double check method to see if any new themes emerge out of the collective content, but that's something you have to decide whether you want to do or not. Keep in mind, in your data analysis section, again, if I was to see your Chapter 3 once it's approved and I collected everything the same way you would have, I should know basically how to manage that data and how to analyze it. If you're going to do some sort of statistical testing, what testing do you believe is the appropriate testing and why for the data you're going to have to be able to test your hypotheses? Are you going to be doing a chi-square test or a t-test? Why would you do those? You're going to have to explain this in the data analysis section. And then, of course, that would conclude your chapter content, and you add your conclusion, then you'd include your introduction. If you think about it, your chapter 3 is pretty complex, but it's easier to write than chapter 2. Chapter 1 is probably the easiest one to write because it begins with a very linear flow of how you can do it, not necessarily from the beginning of the chapter to the end, but there's a logic to it. Once you figure it out, once you have your research method and design and your problem statement figured out, the rest comes pretty easy. Chapter 2 is the most challenging as far as I'm concerned, and chapter 3 literally should be the easiest chapter of your proposal to write, although many of you will make it your hardest, and I don't understand that. If you look at it as you see this slide and you just write one section at a time, because by the time you get to chapter 3, you would have already decided your research method and design. If you have not, there is no reason in the world to write chapter 3 or even start writing it, because you can't unless you know what research method and design. Once you have that figured out, you would also have your research question or questions figured out and your hypotheses if you need them. By the time you get into writing chapter 3, you should already have a pretty good understanding of who the survey population is in the unit of analysis. Now, you may not know sampling techniques right away. You may not know consent and confidentiality right off the bat. But you know what? A couple good days of reading books and information about those, and you should have enough knowledge and information to write a draft of those headings in your chapter 3. You probably already have it determined how you're going to get your data. So what survey instrument do you have? Or if you're going to do open-ended interview questions, then now is the time to write those questions. And there's a right way and a wrong way. You want to make sure that all your questions align either to the themes or the topics, and they align with your research method and design. Again, if you're going to do open-ended interviews, you're not going to be asking questions much like you would in a case study if your study is phenomenological, and vice versa. If you're doing phenomenological study, you're probably looking for people's assumptions or their beliefs or their perceptions. In a case study, it's not necessarily the same. You're not looking for that. You're looking for their experiences. You're looking for them to explain perhaps something to you about what happened. When you look at validity and reliability, if you're not sure, you spend a little time reading about them. You've probably had research courses where you've learned about them. You may not remember it, but you know what? You just refresh it and relearn, and then you write to it. The pilot study, here you just basically write step by step how you're going to do the pilot study, why you're doing each step, so that somebody else could literally do it if they had to. Same thing with the data collection. Data analysis should come pretty easy. By that point, once you got the data, you should know what you're going to do with it. And the reason why this data analysis is important here in Chapter 3 is because once you get your proposal approved, you're basically on your own. The university says, go do it. Now go complete your research and produce your dissertation. They want to know that you have a general understanding of how you're going to analyze that data and the method that's sound and systematic and appropriate and aligned to your research method and design. How many pages is Chapter 3? Wow. A paragraph here, a page there. You add it all up, it's probably, 50 pages? No. I did an average on several of my own mentees, and the average was 17 pages. 17 pages. Not much longer than Chapter 1, if at all. Chapter 2 is the longest chapter with well over 30 pages of content. By the time you put all the other information like an introduction, conclusion, and where you found all your information for your literature review, you're probably talking 35 to 40 pages. Chapter 3 doesn't need to be that long. It just needs to be accurate. It needs to be detailed. It needs to be succinct. It needs to be purposeful. When you look at it that way, it shouldn't be such a big deal. If you know the expectations, it's easier for you to meet those expectations and, yes, exceed them. The person who won the Dissertation of the Year award in 2013 for the quantitative study had 21 pages. Still, 21 pages is not that much. You've written hundreds of pages in your content courses. Your Chapter 2 is twice as long as that. Don't get hung up on how long a chapter should be. Get hung up on the quality that's needed in each paragraph or each section. This is why I encourage you, write one section at a time. Learn that section well. Be that person who develops subject matter expertise first in the research method and design, the research questions, the hypotheses, and so forth as you build each section. When you write and focus on creating only 4 paragraphs or 1 page, it's easier. You can write those 4 or 5 paragraphs, you can put them together, review them, revise them, and then send them to your committee member while you work on the next 2 or 3 paragraphs. Get each one developed well and focus on that. Try not to focus on chapter 1 and 2 when you're writing chapter 3. Try not to worry about how you're going to do the sampling technique when you're still writing more so to the research method and design in chapter 3. There's help. The SAGE Research Methods Online, I believe, is a great resource that not many people know about and use enough. You've listened to the other lessons in this program, and for about the last 5 lessons, I've indicated every time these items here for help. The librarians at the library, great people to help you. You want to be efficient and effective? Go into the library, go straight to a librarian and let them know what you're studying. If you need information and you want subject matter expertise from the experts on your research method and design, just go in there and ask about that. Let them show you their research books. Let them show you who are the experts. No need to worry about your content area when you just have to write those couple pages. Write those couple pages, get them done well, and then move on. When you get into sampling, you're not sure about sampling, then you go back on another trip to the library and you say to the librarian, when you give that person some candy or something as a gift for helping you, say, now I need to do sampling. Help me find all the references you have on research sampling techniques. Go in there, spend a couple hours or get the books and learn about sampling. Then make a draft of that in your paper, and next time go back and do another area. Perhaps it's on reliability or validity. Use ProQuest dissertations. Download dissertations from your university that have been published in the last 6 to 12 months. When you do that, you go and look for those that have been published in your research method and design in the last 6 or 12 months. You get to see exactly what's being approved. In chapter 3, if you're doing the same research method and design as somebody else, chances are you're not going to do anything drastically different than they did as far as the approach. Of course, the content would probably be a little bit different, but you know what? You're not going to be the first one to recreate the wheel. Follow what everybody else has done. Make the wheel go faster, not create a new one. Take what they've done, try to emulate it. Look at their references. And this is a great thing about looking at ProQuest dissertations and finding dissertations that have been published in your same research method and design. You can look and find who they cited, and then you go look for those references when you're at the library. Say, I read a dissertation. Somebody cited this book by Newman. Do you have it? Perhaps they do. Then you start looking at Newman's book, and you learn, and you become even that much more knowledgeable on the breadth and depth of your own research method and design. Now, of course, textbooks, you got to be cautionary with those textbooks because they're generic. They're designed to be able to teach a lot of students in classes the basics. They're not very detailed. They're not very orientated to what you want to do. And keep in mind, a guy like Cresswell isn't much different than a guy like me when I write a book. We want to write books that'll help people, but we also want to sell them because we want to be able to take a trip to Hawaii every year on the royalties. But the idea being textbooks should be the least amount, but they've given you enough general information, perhaps from your research courses, that you can go into and learn about the information you need to know to a certain degree because it's generic. Then you move from the generic to the very specific, and that's why then you go to the library and say, I read the textbooks, I got a basic understanding, now I need to go deeper, and I need to get a richer understanding. So then perhaps you go to Metaskis and you read his work because he's an expert in qualitative research. Then there's that research tutor. I don't know about you, where you're at. I appreciate that you have this program, and I hope that it helped. If you're still uncertain about how to put these pieces together because you've never done research before, and you're thinking that if you don't get your work done quickly, you're going to have to pay for yet another course at your university to get it done, you might consider a research tutor for probably $30 or $40 an hour, a couple times a month. You could find that you're going to make great progress and have this tutor help you. Make sure you get a tutor who's an expert in your research method and design. I encourage you to consider perhaps going to a local large university like a state university where you're at. Go to the research department and see if they have any assistant professors there that would like to make a few extra dollars. Ask again. Make sure you get somebody who's an expert in the research method and design that you're applying. One of my students did this instead of going to a university, she went to Craigslist. She found somebody within a week, and literally within about 2 months, maybe 3 months, not only she get her proposal approved, collected her data, had the first draft of chapter 4 and 5 done, and graduated quicker than she would have otherwise, and paid less for the tutor than she would have had to pay for another quarter at the university for not getting done. Consider a tutor. As far as a reflective summary, I gave you some introduction to this lesson. That it's the overview, the big view, if you will, of chapter 3. The big view consists of helping you to, again, yes, remember that you need to be specific and succinct in your work. You need to become that research expert. And then looking at all the different headings that are common in chapter 3. Now, depending on your research method and design, some of those headings will change, or perhaps your university has a few others, or they have a few areas consolidated. My recommendation of going to ProQuest Dissertation, again, is a reminder to help you understand what's being approved at your university, so you can look to emulate not only the content, but you can also look to emulate the writing styles and get perhaps a better understanding of the APA and academic writing as a researcher. I do believe that education is a lot like life, that the more you put into it, the more you get out of it. And as I've been saying all along, that your dissertation's the same way. That the more you put into it, the more you'll get out of it. More importantly, so other people will get more out of your work as well. I'm Dr. Rich Schuttler. I appreciate you very much enrolling in this Chapter 3 series. If you liked it, I encourage you to send me an email. Let me know what you thought about it. If you didn't like it, tell me that too. Or if I missed something, or you said, hey, you know what? There's something I wish you would have included in there. I'm not against taking that information and perhaps creating another lesson or module. And if I do, I will certainly send it to you at no additional cost, just to add value to your education. Have a great time. Go put together a fantastic Chapter 3 that will present your work extremely well to be significant and substantial.